Hundreds of kilometers across the border, Kyiv's long-range drones penetrated deep into Russia's industrial center on the evening of October 19, 2025. The Novokuibyshevsk oil refinery and the much more important Orenburg complex, Russia's and the world's largest gas processing plant, were the targets according to the Ukrainian General Staff. In addition to destroying a building, the blasts also damaged Russia's delusion of a safe inner region. However, the panicked emergency calls that flooded in from Moscow and Astana the following morning were the real genius of this operation, not the blazing stores. Following the attack, Russia was compelled to temporarily suspend all gas purchases from its ally Kazakhstan, as reported by Reuters. This was no accident. There was much more to this than a fire and industrial mayhem. Putin's energy bridge with Central Asia was broken in a well-planned geopolitical split. Kazakhstan's energy ministry declared hours after the attack that it had declared an emergency and placed the nation's own oil and gas output under urgent supervision. Another important piece of information was validated by the Ukrainian General Staff. In cooperation with the Russian resistance organization Black Spark, Ukrainian Special Operations Forces attacked the 500-kilometer away Orenburg gas processing complex on the evening of October 19th. The Putin administration was greatly embarrassed by this. We must look at the objective, the Orenburg gas processing plant, layer by layer, in order to completely understand how this action resulted in such a catastrophic end. Let's start by examining the geoeconomic aspect. Because the target's geoeconomic significance rather than the technology employed is what makes this operation truly brilliant. The Orenburg plant that is seen on the screen is not your typical gas storage facility or refinery. It is literally a center of Eurasian energy and one of the key switches in Russia's energy system. This is the gas processing facility in Orenburg, which is run by Gazprom Pereirabotka, a Gazprom affiliate. It is the largest gas chemical complex in the world, in addition to being a location for gas storage. To put it another way, it is a multi-billion-dollar, irreplaceable engineering marvel that transforms gas into chemicals and processes and separates it. The Ukrainian General Staff made it clear that one of the gas purification facilities was the target in a composed statement following the attack. This demonstrates the target's non-random selection. The entire facility is controlled by this unit. The raw gas that comes from the pipelines is just pointless pollution without it. It's like hitting the brain when you strike that unit. Immediately, the remainder of the building turns into a worthless heap of metal. This facility served two essential and complementary purposes. It was crucial for Russia's local market to start. Orenburg, one of the key facilities supplying Russia's heavily populated European part, namely Moscow, processed its own produce in the vast Volga-Ural region. Russia's home front would be directly impacted if this facility were to be destroyed. As winter draws near, it was cutting off the vein that supplies electricity to companies and heats Russian homes. It would have been a strategic success on its own. However, Kyiv didn't aim for that. The facility's second and far more important function, the geoeconomic bridge, was the actual aim. All natural gas from Kazakhstan's vast Karachaganak field, Russia's most significant Central Asian ally, was processed at the Orenburg facility, which was the only one of its kind. This was an indisputable infrastructure requirement that dates back to the Soviet era and was not a choice. It was a straightforward equation that had held the two nations together economically for years. Across the border, Kazakhstan uses pipelines to transport the raw gas that is extracted from its resources to Orenburg. The gas was treated, cleaned and separated at this enormous facility, which was run by Gazprom, a major energy company in Russia. A portion of this processed gas was subsequently transferred to other countries via Russia after being sold to the Russian grid. This was a billion-dollar yearly economic umbilical cord that connected the two nations. This particular lifeline was cut off by Ukraine on the evening of October 19th. The ability to process raw gas from Kazakhstan was immediately eliminated when the facility was struck, burned, and its vital processing equipment were turned off. This set off a series of events. Now Russia had no option. In order to fully stop the flow of gas from Kazakhstan, they had to physically cut off this lifeline from their ally. This is self-strangulation brought on by an assault by an adversary. Russia was compelled to shut off its own tap to its friends. This is a prime illustration of how a military assault can become an ideal logistical strangling. Let's now examine the tactical aspect. According to Ukrainian sources, long-range UAVs that were probably outfitted with AI-assisted autonomous navigation systems conducted the operation. This illustrates once further how Russia's multi-layer air defense network and electronic warfare systems were compromised. The distance was the most startling fact of this situation. The attack was carried out between profound 250 and 500 kilometers from the front line, according to Ukrainian officials. This distance must be digested. Russia considers the industrial core at the base of the Urals, which is far from Moscow, to be safe. This demonstrates that Russia's highly regarded S-400, S-300 and Panzer-layered air defense network is utterly deaf-blind and dysfunctional, not only at the front, but even in the most strategically important areas of the nation. These UAVs were able to enter at low altitude by following riverbeds or taking advantage of blind spots in Russian radar coverage, most likely with the use of AI-powered autonomous navigation devices. This declares that Russian air defense is completely paralyzed. The internal collapse of the Putin regime was documented by the Ukrainian General Staff, which confirmed that the Ukrainian Special Operations Forces working with the Russian resistance group Black Spark conducted an operation against the Orenburg gas processing plant 500 kilometers from Ukraine. Local partisan organizations like Black Spark are no longer acting alone in this regard. This is a deliberate state-sponsored campaign of devastation. The 14th Separate UAV Regiment, a legitimate Ukrainian military unit, claimed responsibility for the attack on the Novokuibyshevsk oil refinery, which was also targeted in the same wave of operations. This indicates that Ukraine's recently established UAV forces are putting an end to Russia's economic engine through a well-coordinated long-range and surgically accurate operation. The Orenburg explosions and the Novokuibyshevsk refinery fires set off a chain reaction that sparked a multifaceted crisis right away. This attack has disastrous immediate repercussions for Kazakhstan, Russia's ally, as well as the Russian home front. Let's start by examining the implications for Russia. Collapse of the home front. As previously indicated, the Orenburg plant processed Russian gas produced in the large Volga-Ural region, as well as gas supplied from abroad. One of the primary sources of energy for Moscow and the rest of Russia's heavily populated European region was this production. This artery has since been severed. The plant's closure occurred at a very bad moment for Russia, which was already reeling from sanctions and fighting to make ends meet on a war economy. This attack is a domestic catastrophe that will lead to a regional energy crisis, a slowdown in industrial production, fuel shortages, and a spiral in inflation just as winter approaches. Less fuel, idle production lines, and unheated houses are the results of this. This strike resembled a dagger piercing a bleeding wound. 1 week prior to this attack, a report released by RBC Ukraine on October 12th stated that at least 57 regions, or more than half of the Russian Federation, were already experiencing a serious fuel crisis. Since January 2025, Ukrainian drones have struck and destroyed 21 of Russia's 38 main refineries, or moreover half, according to analysis confirmed by BBC Verify. Fuel to run the nation's war machine and provide food for its civilian population was literally running out. The largest gas chemical complex in the world, which is the center of the system, has now been taken down in addition to the refineries. This has completely paralyzed the current deficit. Based on Forbes Russia's rankings and a study released by the Moscow Times on October 15, 2025, just 4 days prior to the attack, Gazprom was Russia's most indebted business, with a net debt of 6 trillion rubles or almost $60 billion. After losing the European market, the corporation was already heavily indebted. The expense of rebuilding the biggest facility in the world has now been added to this enormous debt. There is no way to fix this damage. This is signing a bankrupt giant's obituary. Gazprom lacks the resources and time necessary to fix this plant. Reminiscent of the Soviet collapse in the early 1990s, we recall the long lines at petrol stations caused by the refinery attacks that started in the spring of 2024 and reached their climax in the fall of 2025. By prohibiting exports and pleading for fuel from Kazakhstan, Russia attempted to temporarily control the situation at the time. But now the massive gas processing company Orenburg and the refinery Novokuibyshevsk are being targeted simultaneously and in concert. There is no way for the Kremlin to cover this gap. One of the major arteries in the system has been severed. This is a governance issue in addition to a fuel crisis. Even in Russia's most industrialized areas, Putin's years-long propaganda that the war is only being fought inside Ukraine's borders and that Moscow and St. Petersburg are safe has now been reduced to ashes. But Putin was much more embarrassed by the immediate consequences of this attack. Due to his humiliation and embarrassment in front of Kazakhstan, his ally, international financial organizations declared just hours after the attack that Kazakhstan's energy ministry had declared the situation urgent and placed the nation's own oil and gas production under immediate surveillance. What's causing the panic? Because there was no longer a facility in Orenburg where Kazakh gas was processed and sold to Russia. The facility was no longer useful. This is a catastrophe for the Kazakh economy as well. Now in ruins is the primary plant where they would refine their gas and sell it to Russia. This implies that businesses will need to substantially cut their capacity or stop manufacturing in a chain reaction. The Kazakh treasury has lost billions of dollars in revenue as a direct result. As the issue develops, the Astana administration is unsure of how to respond. Putin's dilemma is just this. He has served as Kazakhstan's regional guardian for many years. He offered it economic alliances and security assurances. However, the economy of that ally has now been adversely impacted by the war that Putin initiated. Even worse, Russia's inability to process that ally's gas has forced it to close the valve itself. The current situation for Tokayev's Kazakh administration is dire. It could lose billions because of its crucial energy connections with Russia. Putin did not offer them stability like this. They are bringing this battle into their own homes. The economy is in complete turmoil. Kyiv's action is brutally obvious. Ukraine has made a strong statement to the Kazakh government and other impartial parties in the area with this attack. This is the cost of doing business with Russia, of providing a covert lifeline to Putin's war machine. In addition to Ukraine, Putin's war now directly and indirectly impacts Putin's friends. Russia is not a trustworthy ally. You are pulled into its own demise by this venomous thorn. This is the ideal diplomatic ruse. The core of Putin's entire Eurasian strategy, which he has been working to construct for the past 20 years, is dynamite. Recall that Putin promoted the Eurasian Economic Union, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, and CSTO as alternatives to the West. Kazakhstan has traditionally been the foundation of these systems due to its vastness, both geographically and economically. Kyiv's action is now eroding this coalition and making it useless. Kazakhstani elites are now questioning the purpose of this partnership, since our alleged ally who is meant to defend us is wrecking our economy and is unable to even run its own war. There is more to the Orenburg facility attack than a straightforward explosion. In actuality, it is a move that undermines Putin's internal regional hegemony. However, this Orenburg fire is neither a singular occurrence nor a coincidental triumph. It is the most recent and advanced development of a methodical strangulation plan that Ukraine has been developing for months or possibly years. This is the last move in a protracted conflict against the Russian oil industry. Let's review this collapse's time frame. In the spring of 2024, it all started. One by one, Ukraine targeted Russia's oil refineries with an unparalleled campaign of drone attacks at that time. Deep within Russia's borders, Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles launched an attack on the country's biggest refineries. According to Reuters' study published on March 12, 2024, these strikes destroyed at least 12% of Russia's entire oil processing capability. An international energy behemoth was humiliated on its own soil. Putin's propaganda about his energy superpower was no longer able to fuel his own citizens. In order to secure the supply of fuel for the military and stop the rising panic in the domestic market, the Kremlin was compelled to adopt drastic steps, such as prohibiting the export of gasoline. The Russian economy suffered a blow worth billions of dollars. However, the situation didn't stop there. Because of how successful the strikes were, Russia experienced an unthinkable level of integration. The issue worsened to such a degree that on April 8, 2024, Reuters recorded yet another disgrace. One of the biggest energy producers in the world, the Russian Federation, essentially pleaded with its friend Kazakhstan to establish an emergency supply of gasoline. Moscow asked Astana to supply 100,000 tons of gasoline. Diplomacy was being begged for here. Because of the Ukrainian drones, Putin was pleading with Kazakhstan for gasoline. Russia's economic vulnerability and reliance on its allies were cruelly shown during this time. Let's travel back in time to October 19, 2025, which is now. Ukraine has learned its lesson. It had formulated its plan. For Russia, the fall of 2025 was catastrophic. Many of the over 40 Russian facilities that were targeted were rendered inoperable. Furthermore, almost 40% of Russia's oil production capability has been lost as of today. Every refinery complex had at least one target, from Volgograd to Smolensk, from St. Petersburg to Crimea. In 2024, Russia begged Kazakhstan for fuel in an attempt to mend its wounds. This is where we witness the transformation of a tactical attack into a strategic chess play. Ukraine's most advanced diplomatic checkmate move to date is this blow to Orenburg. Russia's most significant, largest and most crucial ally in Central Asia, Kazakhstan, was directly arrayed against Putin in this attack. Let's now take a step back from the chessboard and consider the larger picture, the complete map. This attack has disastrous geopolitical repercussions for Russia. First, the isolation of Russia. Remember the equation at the beginning of the conflict. Putin started the conflict by holding the West, particularly Germany, hostage and threatening them with energy and the Nord Stream project. His goal was to paralyze NATO and split the West. This equation is entirely inverted at the place we are at now. By destroying his energy connections with his own allies, Kazakhstan-Ukraine is isolating Putin in his own region, Eurasia. Russia's own friends are now the targets of energy blackmail, not the West. Kyiv is now the one causing economic attrition and engaging in asymmetric warfare on the enemy's territory. Beneath the debris of this assault, there is more than just steel and concrete. Underneath this debris is Putin's energy superpower philosophy, which dates back 20 years. This was the core of the contemporary Russian identity. 5 days before to the incident on October 14th, the new Voice of Ukraine said that a startling report prepared by SRU, Ukraine's foreign intelligence agency, exposed the harsh reality. By the end of 2025, Russia would have to import 60% of its petroleum needs due to continuous attacks on refineries. Consider that. In order to keep its vehicles and tanks operating, the nation that promoted the false narrative that it was one of the biggest energy exporters in the world may now have to import petroleum. The doctrine of superpowers is not dying. It's acknowledging that the doctrine was false. Russia can no longer support its allies or itself as a bankrupt state. The new front of conflict is the second geopolitical effect. This assault demonstrates how battle has evolved. The conflict has spread beyond Ukraine's frontline communities and trenches. The conflict has spread to Russia's economic allies' industrial heartland and the most delicate pillars of its diplomatic ties. The last and most convincing evidence of this collapse comes from T-Advisor's examination of Gazprom's financial accounts. Gazprom was obliged to scale back its 2025 investment goal to 1.5 trillion rubles because to its crippling 6 trillion ruble debt. According to this technical number, the billions of dollars required to reconstruct the biggest gas facility in the world are no longer accessible. As a result, the enormous fireball that erupted into the sky in Orenburg on October 19th was more than just a gas facility burning. It was the remains of Putin's fantasy of a Eurasian Union and his rhetoric about energy superpowers. In addition to destroying a multi-billion-dollar economic powerhouse for Russia, Ukraine's use of inexpensive drones and strategic thinking has caused it to become estranged from its most significant regional partner in a devastating diplomatic move. This is the ideal fusion of geopolitical chess with technical asymmetry. In addition to using its own armaments, Kyiv is attacking Russia with its own allies and dependents. Now in its own backyard, with its own lifelines severed, Russia is choking in the ashes of the war it initiated. We appreciate you selecting us.